Go for it, Beth.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So one of the advantages of having the fuzzy vision that age provides is I came down on Ajahn Chah's Memorial Day and I saw the screen in the Dhamma hall, but I couldn't actually make out too much detail, and from the outside all I could see is this brown stream, and that was the Sangha circumambulating, and but to me it just seemed like this flow, like this current, this river, and a river of goodness, of aspiration to purity. And it seems to me that I'm more reflecting these days how much a life well lived with the Dhamma can be of benefit to oneself, but of benefit to so many, many beings, as Ajahn Chah is a testament to. So I'm reading today from another person who has provided an incredible stream of goodness in the world, Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm reading from a journal entry that he made in the 1960s from a book called Fragrant Palm Leaves. I'm going to read a little bit of the inside of the introduction just to give a context. Fragrant Palm Leaves reveals a vulnerable and questioning young man, a student and teaching assistant at Princeton and Columbia Universities from 1962 to 1963, reflecting on the many difficulties he and his fellow monks faced at home in Vietnam, trying to make Buddhism relevant to the people's needs. We also follow Thich Nhat Hanh as he returns to Vietnam in 1964 and helps establish the movement known as Engaged Buddhism, starting self-help villages and a new university and a Buddhist order and many other efforts for peace. Fragrant Palm Leaves is regarded by many Vietnamese as Thich Nhat Hanh's most endearing book. This extraordinary translation offers Westerners a glimpse into another time and into the mind of a great thinker and activist. It gives a model of how to live fully, with awareness, during a time of challenge and upheaval. I'm starting on page 82. It's an entry he made in his journal on the 23rd of December 1962. It was Christmas Eve in Princeton. We returned to Campus Centre a bit melancholy, drank some tea, talked, and then watched TV. It's funny how much our surroundings influence our emotions. Our joys and sorrows, likes and dislikes, are coloured by our environment so much that often we just let our surroundings dictate our course. We go along with public feelings until we no longer even know our own true aspirations. We become a stranger to ourselves, moulded entirely by society. Our friends at Pung Boi was the monastery that they began in Vietnam that he had to leave. Our friends at Pung Boi always stood up to social conformity and resisted society's moulds. Naturally, we met with opposition, both internal and external. Sometimes I feel caught between two opposing selves, the false self imposed by society and what I would call my true self. How often we confuse the two and assume society's mold to be our true self. Battles between our true selves rarely result in a peaceful reconciliation. Our mind becomes a battlefield on which the five aggregates, the form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations and consciousness of our being, are strewn about like debris in a hurricane. Trees topple, branches snap, houses crash. These are our loneliest moments. Yet every time we survive such a storm, we grow a little. Without storms like these, I would not be who I am today. But I rarely hear such a storm coming until it is already upon me. It seems to appear without warning, as though treading silently on silk slippers. I know it must have been brewing a long time, simmering in my own thoughts and mental formations. But when such a frenzied hurricane strikes, nothing outside can help. I am battered and torn apart, and I am also saved. I passed through such a storm this past autumn. It began in October. At first it seemed like a passing cloud, but after several hours I began to feel my body turning to smoke and floating away. I became a faint wisp of a cloud. I had always thought of myself as a solid entity, and suddenly I saw that I'm not solid at all. This wasn't philosophical or even an enlightenment experience. It was just an ordinary impression, completely ordinary. I saw that the entity I had taken to be me was really a fabrication. My true nature, I realized, was much more real, both uglier and more beautiful than I could have imagined. The feeling began shortly before 11 o'clock at night on October 1st. I was browsing on the 11th floor of Butler Library. I knew the library was about to close, and I saw a book that concerned the area of my research. It slid off the shelf and I slid it off the shelf and held it in my two hands. It was large and heavy. I read that it had been published in 1892 and was donated to Columbia Library the same year. On the back cover was a slip of paper that recorded the names of borrowers and the dates they took it out of the library. The first time it had been borrowed was in 1915. The second time was in 1932. I would be the third. Can you imagine? I was only the third borrower on October 1st, 1962. For 70 years, only two other people had stood in the same spot I now stood, pulled the book from the shelf, and decided to check it out. I was overcome with the wish to meet those two people. I don't know why, but I wanted to hug them. But they had vanished, and I too. I will soon disappear. 2 points on the same straight line will never meet. I was able to encounter two people in space, but not in time. I stood quietly for a few minutes, holding the book in my hands. Then I remembered what Anton Cherbu had said the day before, when we were discussing how to research Vietnamese Buddhism. He told me that I was still young. I didn't believe him. I felt as though I'd lived a long time and had seen so much of life. I'm almost 36, which is not young, but that night, while standing among the stacks at Butler Library, I saw that I am neither young nor old, existent nor non-existent. My friends know I can be as playful and mischievous as a child. I love to kid around and enter fully into the game of life. I also know what it is to get angry, and I know the pleasure of being praised. I am often on the verge of tears or laughter, but beneath all of those emotions, what else is there? How can I touch it? If there isn't anything, why would I be so certain that there is? Still holding the book, I felt a glimmer of insight. I understood that I am empty of ideals, hopes, viewpoints, or allegiances. I have no promises to keep with others. In that moment, the sense of myself as an entity amongst other entities disappeared. I knew that this insight did not arise from disappointment, desire, despair, fear, or ignorance. A veil lifted silently and effortlessly. That is all. If you beat me, stone me, or even shoot me, everything that is considered to be me will disintegrate. Then what is actually there will reveal itself, faint as smoke, elusive as emptiness, and yet neither smoke nor emptiness, neither ugly nor not ugly, beautiful yet not beautiful. It is like a shadow on a screen. At that moment I had the deep feeling that I had returned. My clothes, my shoes, even the essence of my being had vanished, and I was carefree as a grasshopper pausing on a blade of grass. Like the grasshopper, I had no thoughts of the divine. The grasshopper's gods perceive form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and objects of mind. They know increasing and decreasing, defiled and immaculate, production and destruction. When a grasshopper sits on a blade of grass, he has no thought of separation, resistance, or blame. Human children prefer dragonflies whose wings and bellies are as red as chili peppers. But the green grasshopper blends completely with the green grass, and children rarely notice it. It neither retreats nor beckons. It knows nothing of philosophy or ideals. It is simply grateful for its ordinary life. Dash across the meadow, my dear friend, and greet yesterday's child. When you can't see me, you yourself will return. Even when your heart is filled with despair, you will find the same grasshopper on the same blade of grass. Steve had left to spend a few days in Boston, and I was alone in our apartment. I left the bedroom door wide open day and night, like a prayer. What I was undergoing was neither happy nor sad. Some life dilemmas cannot be solved by study or rational thought. We just live with them, struggle with them, and become one with them. Such dilemmas are not in the realm of the intellect. They come from our feelings and our will, and they penetrate our subconscious and our body, down to the marrow of our bones. I became a battlefield. I couldn't know until the storm was over if I would survive, and not in the sense of my physical self, but in the deeper sense of my core self. I experienced destruction upon destruction and felt a tremendous longing for the presence of those I love, even though I knew that if they were present, I would have to chase them away or run away myself. When the storm finally passed, layers of inner mortar lay crumbled. On the now deserted battlefield, a few sunbeams peeked through the horizon, too weak to offer any warmth to my weary soul. I was full of wounds, yet experienced an almost thrilling sense of aloneness. No one would recognize me in my new manifestation. No one would close to me would know it was I. Friends want you to appear in the familiar form that they know. They want you to remain intact, the same. But that isn't possible. How could we continue to live if we were changeless? To live, we must die every instant. We must perish again and again in the storms that make life possible. It would be better, I thought, if everyone cast me from their thoughts. I cannot be a human being and at the same time be an unchanging object of love or hatred, annoyance or devotion. I must continue to grow. As a child, I always outgrew the clothes my mother sewed for me. I can preserve those garments, fragrant with childish innocence and my mother's love, in a trunk for memory's sake. But I must have new and different clothes now to fit who I have become. We must sew our own clothes and not just accept society's ready-made suit. The clothes I make for myself may not be stylish or even accepted, but it is more than a matter of clothes. It is a question of who I am as a person. I reject the yardstick others use to measure me. I have a yardstick of my own, one I've discovered myself. Even if I find myself in opposition to public opinion, I must be who I am. I cannot force myself back into the shell I've just broken out of. This is a source of great loneliness for me. Perhaps I could persuade my dearest friends to accompany me on my journey through space, but it might be dizzying for them, and might even incite feelings of hatred or resentment. Would they force me to return to Earth, back to the illusory plane of old hopes, desires, and values, all in the name of friendship? What good would that be for any of us? That is why I want to burn down the huts where my friends dwell. I want to incite chaos to help them break through the shells that confine them. I want to smash the chains that bind them and topple the gods that restrain them. For us to grow, petty amusements or even sorrows must not dominate us. A free person neither adheres to nor violates life's rules. The most glorious moment in life is to witness a friend's return. Not exactly a return, but an infinitely exquisite moment when he emerges from the chaos caused by the annihilation of his last refuge. There he is liberated from the hard shells of 1,000 lifetimes, standing nobly in the brilliant light cast by his burning refuge. In that moment he will lose everything, but in the same moment he possesses everything. Beginning at that moment, we are truly present for each other. During my struggle, I was unable to converse, even after Steve returned. I could only manage manual chores. Steve recognized that I was going through something unusual and took great care not to disturb me. When I think of how sensitive he was during that time, great affection wells up in me. He didn't try to draw me into conversation. He only communicated what was essential. From time to time, I was aware that he was watching me, his eyes filled with concern. He spent time in the bedroom so I could have the front room to myself. He was so understanding. One Sunday morning, I suggested we take a walk down to the river. We sat on the grass until early afternoon, and then walked home. We didn't exchange a word the whole time. Back at the apartment, Steve asked in a soft voice, "Are you tired, Ty?" I answered that I wasn't and thanked him. Youth is a time for seeking truth. Years ago I wrote in my journal that even if it destroys you, you must hold to the truth. I knew early on that finding truth is not the same as finding happiness. You aspire to see the truth, but once you have seen it, you cannot avoid suffering. Otherwise, you've seen nothing at all. You are still hostage to some arbitrary conventions set up by others. People judge themselves and each other based on standards that are not their own. In fact, such standards are mere wishful thinking, borrowed from public opinion and common viewpoints. One thing is judged as good and another as bad. One thing is virtuous and another evil. One thing true and another false. But when the criteria used to arrive at such judgments are not your own, they are not the truth. Truth cannot be borrowed. It can only be experienced directly. The fruit of exploration, suffering, and the direct encounter between one's own spirit and reality, the reality of the present moment, and the reality of 10,000 lifetimes. For each person it is different, and it is different today than it was yesterday. When we discover something to be true today through our own direct experience, we will see that our previous assumptions were wrong, or at least incomplete. Our new way of looking transcends yesterday's desires, prejudices, narrow-mindedness, and habits. We see that to use the golden molds and emerald yardsticks of yesterday's understanding is nothing less than slavery or imprisonment. When we attain a new understanding of reality, it is impossible to accept things we know to be false. Our actions will be based on our own understanding, and we will follow only those rules we have tested through our own direct experience. We will discard false rules and conventions of the current social order. But we have to expect that society will turn on us with a vengeance. Human history is filled with the tragedies caused by that vengeance. History teaches us that we die if we oppose the system, yet many individuals continue to challenge the darkness, despite the danger in doing so. Those who pursue the truth are members of the community of truth seekers and reformers throughout time and space. They do not resign themselves to a collective fate that offers no laurels. The faint beams of light that appear after the desolation of the storm made me feel even more alone and abandoned. I felt the unbearable pain of a woman who is about to give birth to a child she already knows will be sentenced to death. She is consumed by despair, inconsolable and humiliated. She knows that she is with child, but a child who was already condemned to die. And she knows that she will have to witness her child's death. There is no way to avoid her fate. Why couldn't she give birth to a healthy, sweet child like other mothers? A child who would give her hope and pride and joy. A child who would earn the praises of others. But we have to stand up for the truth. We cannot just gather moss like an old stone or assume a false self once we see the truth. I'm skipping a little bit and picking up on page 92. One morning I felt the sky brighten a little. I received a birthday card from home, which arrived exactly on my birthday. That was the day I felt myself reborn. In the card, too, had copied 3 lines of a poem by Vu Tru. Walking in the desolate desert, a bear attacks me by surprise. I simply look him in the eye. Yes, I thought. I have looked the beast straight in the eye and seen it for what it is. I am like someone just recovered from a near-fatal illness who has stared death in the face. I got dressed, walked outside, and strolled along Broadway, thirsty for the morning sun after so many days of darkness. The winds of this storm had finally dispersed. Then the latest piece of writing I could find from Thich Nhat Hanh was a message he wrote to his community on October 11th, 2017, when he turned 91. How much have you been able to continue Thai? Thai's the name they give to him, meaning teacher. In Plum Village, we don't usually say happy birthday. Instead, we wish each other happy continuation day. What continues? Who is continued? Today we contemplate Thai's own continuation, as well as that of Thai's students, monastic and lay. What does it mean to continue Thai? We can speak of 2 forms of continuation. We continue in our own body and mind, and we continue in the body and mind of those who have received our transmission. The Buddha taught that the person who transmits, the receiver of the transmission, and the object being transmitted are one. There is no transmitter and no one who receives the transmission. There is only transmission, that's all. As students of Thai, you have to be his continuation through every breath and every step you take. Over the last 60 years, Thai has been continually transmitting his experience, all his dreams and aspirations, to countless people, through the way he speaks, the way he walks and stands, the way he eats and drinks, and the way he works in mindfulness. He has also transmitted himself through many books and Dhamma talks, in front of audiences both great and small. as well as with direct personal interactions. How much have you been able to continue Thai? Today, if we are able to live happily, then that is a good continuation. We are continuing Thai well. This is something we must do every day. The cloud won't be sad when it's no longer in a form of a cloud, because it knows that it has become rain, and as rain it will continue its contribution. And when the rain is no longer there, that is when we see the river continuing the mission of the rain. That is why nothing dies and nothing is lost. We often get caught in familiar forms that we recognize, and so we cry and lament when that familiar form is no longer there. Perhaps science can now use cloning to create 1,000 babies that look just like Thai when he was a child. They would only need a few thousand cells from Thai's body to do this. These thousands of babies would be identical and look exactly like Thai as a child. You could enjoy watching them playing, talking and laughing, just as Thai did when he was young. But they are not truly Thai, even if every one of them was to have all the same wholesome and unwholesome seeds. If they do not meet a wise teacher, if they do not live in an environment where they can encounter the practice, or if they do not go through the same challenges as Thai did, then they are not truly the continuation of Thai. However, if you have Thai's Dhamma joy and Thai's happiness in every step and every breath, then even though in appearance you may not look like him, inside you are a continuation of Thai. That is why the practice of signlessness in the 3 doors of liberation is so important in helping us recognize true continuation. I'm going to finish with his Refuge Prayer that came out of the book of poetry called something like, I'm blanking, but it's please call them by their true names. At the foot of the Bodhi tree, beautifully seated, peaceful and smiling, the living source of understanding and compassion, to the Buddha I go for refuge. The path of mindful living, leading to healing, joy and enlightenment, the way of peace. To the Dhamma I go for refuge. The loving and supportive community of practice, realizing harmony, awareness and liberation. To the Sangha I go for refuge. I am aware that the 3 gems are within my heart. I vow to realize them. I vow to practice mindful breathing and smiling, looking deeply into things. I vow to understand living beings and their suffering, to cultivate compassion and loving kindness, and to practice joy and equanimity. I vow to offer joy to one person in the morning and to help relieve the grief of one person in the afternoon. I vow to live simply and sanely, content with just a few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of all worry and anxiety in order to be light and free. I am aware that I owe so much to my parents, teachers, friends, and all beings. I vow to be worthy of their trust, to practice wholeheartedly, so that understanding and compassion will flower, and I can help living beings be free from their suffering. May the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha support my efforts.
Dhamayang Dhammakithaya Sadhu Karang Dadamase. Sadhu, 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 Anumodam. One more.
question. I think I'm noticing that in that reading there's like there's a theme of like cessation, being aware of cessation, and I've been getting into that lately, observing cessation and like anapanasati. It's been kind of interesting to me, and I'm wondering how would one start or build that part.
Cessation.
Yeah, observing cessation.
Well, a lot of it is just bringing it into consciousness, and using it as, because usually what we do is we miss it, because the habit of mind is to go on to the next thing, the next feeling, the next thought, the next plan, the next assumption, so that we tend to miss cessation and the opportunity that cessation opens up for us. So and then, because that's, when you think of the, of course, one of the most, say, famous or most well-known verses of the Buddhas is around, say, anicca vata sankhara upantavaya dhammino upajitava nirujanti te sang upasamo sukho. So the sense of that one reckon all compounded things are impermanent, subject to arising and ceasing, but their cessation is peace. So that recognizing that peace, or being willing to allow the mind to approach peace, because usually what we associate cessation with is so often cessation of me, and then what that does is bring up a sense of oh my God, I got to be something, I've got to do something, I have to think something, so that I can be me. And we just so we keep buying into that, rather than being willing to acknowledge or allow peace to be present, or peace, or a sense of the stillness of the possibility of stillness of being, so that making it conscious opens up the possibilities of that relinquishment of the whole program of self and the I, me, mine habit. And it's just a bad habit that we have picked up.
So instead of trying to like associate peace with like feeling good, like serene.
Pardon?
Instead of trying to associate peace with being serene and kind of just open up to the space.
Yes. Yeah. I mean that's a part of. I mean, of course, the way we experience it can be serenity, but it's without having to label it or possess it.
I'm just in Thich Nhat Hanh's journal entry, the way that he experienced something like some really dark states, and he was very grateful to this a person his roommate who didn't interfere. And on the other hand, sometimes interference, in a sense, with either ours or other people's dark states is something that's actually very helpful and necessary.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, as to if you have any, and I mean there's probably no easy answer, but in terms of figuring out both, say, both internally and externally, whether dark states are something that is useful and necessary to go through, or if we've just, and I've done it to myself, we just picked up some sense object and gotten entangled in it. And it's like, if you hadn't picked that, if you hadn't picked that up, you wouldn't be suffering. And you just made a mistake, pull out, this isn't necessary.
Yeah, I don't think there's a straight answer to that. It's really it's that ability and willingness to tune in and be sensitive to what seems to be appropriate, and then reflecting again on, even if it seems to be appropriate, was it actually appropriate? So that's that sense of being able to contemplate. It's like in the advice that the Buddha gave to Rahula, contemplating an action before you engage in it, contemplating the action as you engage in it, contemplating the action, body, speech, and mind, after you've engaged in it, because there are going to be different perspectives and something to be learned from each time, because something might seem, oh yeah, it's good to interfere or not at the time, but you don't know for sure, and you can only and being open and clear to learning from it, rather than coming from a view or an opinion of what you think is best, or what, similar to what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying, of even what the society around one has as a particular program, a judgment around it. Yeah. Each are, those are that's where that sense of being able to learn and to trust in and it's what, again, in terms of the Buddha's teachings, what you're coming back to is suffering and cessation of suffering, as opposed to the conventional understanding of right or wrong, good or bad. You have to take that into account, but to actually know, it's more what accords with Dhamma is around suffering, cessation of suffering.
So I've heard it said in this room, it's faith that lets go, and I've also heard over the years from many Western teachers that Western practitioners have sometimes a bit of a problem with faith.
Yeah.
So it seems a very important gap. If it's faith that lets go, then it seems a good place to focus attention. And I'm interested in deepening faith, the 3 gems, but anything else you could say about that?
Well, see, that's where faith is informed by wisdom, investigation, discernment, but then being able to, it's like the open aiko, that leading into the Dhamma of the Buddha is leading inwards, so that being drawing it in to the heart and reflecting or experiencing, feeling the experience and the result, and being willing to tune into that, as opposed to leaving it as an intellectual concept or an idea that one's trying to conform with. As sort of what does it actually, what resonates after, what's the what's the experience. Yeah.
Has anybody heard news of how his health is doing?
Oh, I haven't.
Well, he went back in August to Vietnam, so he was well enough to do that. He was in a wheelchair, but I think he's made a remarkable recovery from the stroke several years ago.
Mm.